All right, I have another topic I need to go on. I was asked to cover what's going on with this new Korean conference. So let me pull up this article so we have something to go on here. And then I need to switch the screen so you guys can see what I'm looking at. Here we are. If you didn't see it, is written by Walter Fenton, who's one of the higher ups at the GMC, and it's about a new annual conference that started within the United States. I'm going to make it a little bigger so y'all can read it. But it is overlapping many conferences. So it says, earlier this month, the GMC's TLC authorized the launch of its first non-geographical conference, the Korean-American Provisional Annual Conference. It is set to hold its first official gathering May 6th through 9th in Dallas, Texas. A coalition of Korean-American clergy and lay leaders collaborated over the past year to establish the historic Provisional Annual Conference. The group, like others before them, first created a Transitional Conference Advisory Team, TCAT, to facilitate the formation process. However, a unique aspect of this advisory team was its focus on exploring the feasibility of a conference organized along ethnic rather than geographical lines. Like, as soon as we get there, I got alarms blaring, and I'll tell you why in a minute. This approach aimed to address the language and cultural needs of the Korean-American members. I'm sure I read that wrong, but it got the point through. To ensure a diverse representation to oversee this initiative, the advisory team was comprised of men and women from various regions across the U.S. Quote, when we started this journey, we knew there would be questions and challenges, said the Reverend Kevin Ryu, the new conference's chief connectional officer. Why conference based on ethnicity, he said. How will local churches thousands of miles apart unite together? And what's the future for such an entity? Korean-American Methodists have actually thought long and hard about these questions well before joining the Global Methodist Church. Ryu and Reverend Dr. Han-Seung Ko, the new conference's president pro tempore, explained the biggest drivers for an ethnically based conference were language and cultural issues. So y'all remember that. We'll come back to that. Language and cultural issues. Korean clergy and laity, almost all former United Methodists, believe that the UMC's conference system diminished their influence. While there were over 250 Korean-American local churches in the United Methodist Church in 2020, they were scattered around approximately 50 annual conferences. Consequently, they were few in number in any given annual conference, and the language barrier only contributed to their sense of isolation. Various attempts were made to address their concerns, such as proposed Korean-American Missionary Conference, but it failed to gain the approval of the UMC's 1996 General Conference. So there's a bit more to read there, and you can easily find that article by doing a web search. But I need to talk about this. If we read the whole article, I'm worried that we'll lose some of you. This is a problem for me, and it's not a problem that I haven't done anything about. I've spoken with the TLC's chairwoman, Karen Nicholas, whom I consider a friend. I think she's a very intelligent and conscientious believer. I don't have a single bad word to say about Karen Nicholas. But we talked on the phone about this, and I said, about the racial history of the United Methodist Church. It ended, the predecessor to the United Methodist Church was the Methodist Church, which created the jurisdictional system so that white Methodists would not have to worship with black Methodists. They created what was called the central jurisdiction, which was all the black churches in the United States, and they had their own jurisdiction, and then they had all the white jurisdictions, and that ended in 1968 whenever the Methodist Church combined with the UEB and the Methodist Protestant Church, I think, and that ended that segregated past. It was a racially, ethnically, culturally divided situation that ended a long time ago, and to people like me, this looks like a step backwards. And I've already seen this coming in some ways, and I don't want to be divisive, but I've been talking about how our approach to race needs to get figured out on the front end before we dig ourselves in a hole that we can't get out of. And what I'm talking about is the anti-racist approach versus the colorblind approach. These two do not fit. The MLK version of colorblindness, of ethnicity not having anything to do with anything substantial in a person's life, the United States at least being a melting pot where different ethnicities come together and share in the same social fabric, that does not fit with the anti-racist understanding of Ibram X. Kendi and the white fragility lady, I always forget her name. That notion is that we need to protect black spaces, Korean spaces, Hispanic spaces, and they don't care about white spaces because we're always the bad guy because we're at the top of whatever hierarchy there is. These two things don't fit. Now, does that mean that the Korean perspective is not at all sympathetic? Absolutely not. I would be very frustrated if I felt like my voice was diluted because of my ethnicity. But that's not the same thing as my voice being diluted because I'm part of a big group of people and everybody's voice has equality. That's what we're looking at here is, well, first off, the GMC has to be a global church, right? We have to be a body that is willing to be run by people who don't speak English and look white and have money, and then people who are not white and don't speak English and don't have money need to be willing to step up to the plate and lead and do that hard intercultural work of negotiating with people who don't see things the same. When you create these spaces where you don't have to do that, it's one thing if you're creating like a club, great, create a club. But it's another thing whenever you are making sure that your voice is actually amplified. So with culturally American congregations in the GMC, the GMC has all kinds of rules about how many churches you got to have, what kind of positions got to be filled. It's very strict. I sat on the TCAP for the Heartland Annual Conference, but they're not using the same standards for international conferences. And now it's clear, if there's only 250 churches, well, and it doesn't say all 250 are joining, but I wonder if they're meeting the same standards as Anglo churches. So what I'm wondering is everybody being held to the same standard, or are we seeing different standards used for different people based on ethnicity? And are we going to elevate certain voices based on ethnicity? This is another recipe for resentment. One of the things that is just a reality. If I moved to Italy and I wanted to participate in organizations in the continental or the area of Italy, then I need to learn to speak Italian. There's an ancient saying, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. It's a saying for a reason, that whenever you're in a majority area, the minority needs to learn to do business with the majority. And whenever you're not facilitating that, you're actually disabling people who need to integrate. And there is no sentiment that it's not some like nativist, we're white and our way is the best. It's just, this is America. The language is English. If you want to do well in America, you need to speak English. We need to be helping our brothers and sisters who don't speak English well to speak English. If we give them spaces where they don't have to speak English to do well, then we're taking away the incentive to learn English. So I would say that that's infantilizing them. And a lot of people will say, well, that's what they want. I know, but that's not what's good for the long-term fabric of what we're trying to do here. If we're trying to have a collaborative effort around the world, a multicultural effort aimed at being one people in Christ Jesus, then it does not help to separate along ethnic or cultural lines. Fine geographic lines because of practical considerations, but I find this very concerning. Now, I talked to Kara and I said, okay, what if, going back to the South Carolina issue, what if a bunch of black people leave the UMC and they don't really want to have anything to do with the white people, but they want to join the GMC? They want to have their own conference again. Are we going to have a segregated black conference now? And she said, I doubt very much that that's going to happen. She said the main driving factor with the Koreans was the language barrier, which I've already spoken to. And it's not that it's an easy barrier to get past, but my thing is, this is the hard work that Christ requires that we do in the church, and were Americans to go somewhere else, we would need to learn the laws and the language of the land. I just don't think it's a loving thing to provide an American, if I went over to Kenya, Ethiopia, our missional area for the Heartland Annual Conference, and everybody started mandating that they create an English-speaking American place for me, I think that'd be a tremendous waste of resources for me. I just need to learn to speak the language there to get along with the people there. So anyway, she said she didn't think it's very realistic that black people are going to try and form their own conference in the GMC. And I don't know why that is. I didn't ask why that is. But, there are how many other ethnic contingencies that have Methodist presence? You've seen my interview with Mao Her. There's a Hmong Methodist presence. Hmong is not Korean. They're a different ethnic group. How many ethnic groups are in America that are also Methodist? How many are we going to create? And why just for the Koreans? How is this not a slippery slope? But even if it's not a slippery slope, if it only stops here, now we've already established a precedent for a theology that's undergirded by anti-racism, affinity group, and gathering along ethnic worldly lines rather than geographic kingdom lines. I just don't see how this is a good thing. I get that. To be clear, this is not the white people at all saying, we don't want anything to do with those Koreans. There's none of that there, and I would never allege something like that. It's clearly a push from the Koreans to say, we want our own space where we can speak our own language, have our own cultural norms. Would you please give it to us? And we would like to be in fellowship with you. We just need to have our own space. And I think that's where the integrity of the GMC is going to be tested in many ways. On Monday, I'm going to publish a conversation I had with Warren Latham, who, of course, has a mission that he's doing in Venezuela, that he's very tied in, doing amazing work. In Venezuela, he's trying to facilitate these conversations with Venezuelan Methodism joining the GMC. Problem is, they don't practice infant baptism there, only believer baptism. So he when you watch our conversation, he'll say, GMC needs to decide if they're going to die on this hill or not. He says, for me, it's not a hill I'm willing to die on. But for a lot of people, including me, infant baptism, that there's a whole sacramental theology around that I think is worth fighting for. Similarly, I would say the vision of racial equality and ethnic in heaven, I don't think there's going to be a Korean section. Sorry. I don't think there's going to be an American section. I don't think there's going to be a Ghanaian section. I think there's just going to be believers all together lifting up our voices in praise to God and the Lamb. And I think we're supposed to reflect that on earth. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. I think our churches should be places where we see this integration. And I wish that we, as a body, the GMC, had been clear about that on the front end so that there could have been a loving response to the Koreans saying, we desperately want to be in fellowship with you, and we were going to do everything we can to make sure that your voices are given equal parity with all other voices, American or non-American. But no, we can't give you your own space. We're not going to do that for anybody. But I'm not in charge. I'm not on the TLC. I'm just some guy off in rural Oklahoma saying my thoughts here. Maybe I'm completely wrong about this stuff. Maybe this had to take place in order for, I don't know. I mean, what's the concern that some people are not going to come on board? I mean, we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute, but I'm deeply concerned about this. And I don't want to cast aspersions at any of the people in leadership. They have a very hard job. They work very hard to serve Jesus Christ through his church. But I'm just really concerned about this decision. That's all I'm trying to convey. And I just wanted to get maybe there's something else to be said. I've already reached out to Reverend Ryu, by the way, asked for an interview. I just wanted to ask him directly, about some of these reasons and why integration isn't an option, why I'm just interested to get input from actual Koreans rather than a bunch of white people talking about the Koreans. So maybe there will be some follow-up on this, but for right now, I just wanted to say what I had to say on that.